I was wrong, and I need to do better. But as it turns out, that's a good thing. So back in April, I made this statement. So basically, if you've got the time and the space for a 3D printer, it's your hobby at the end of the day. But if you've got a little bit of spare cash, and you're a little bit time poor, then honestly, I can just do so much better. Hi, my name's James, and in the comments section of that video I got lots of what can be politely described as feedback on the resin, on the setup, and on the settings I was using for the printer. So when the lovely folks over at Yes That's 3D Printed reached out to me to test their new Wargamer resin, which was co-developed by my friend Ross, I thought this is the perfect time to do better.
Hi mate, you alright?
Hello mate, that's great timing. Mate, you've played with a few printers, right?
Some, yeah.
I wonder if you can give me some advice.
Yeah, sure thing. What are you struggling with?
You saw my last video about printing a big night thing and comparing it to Games Workshop. Well, I got a bit of comments about how my setup wasn't ideal for that video, so I'm just trying to tweak things and refine things a little bit. Do you reckon you can run through the basics for me?
Absolutely not a problem. A lot of people think that 3D printing is much more complex than it is, and the simple things are get your exposure times right, get your temperature right, you'll have perfect prints every time.
That's awesome, mate. Brilliant. Can you recommend any videos, any creators I should check out?
Yeah, definitely. One of the best videos you can watch for getting your 3D printer set up is How to Print Miniatures by FauxHammer, and I'll send you a link for that one. Make sure you also check out Dennys Wang, who shows you how to get the absolute most out of your printers. Another one that I like to watch is J3D Tech. You've also got VogMan, who does some brilliant reviews, and you've also got a new one that I've started watching recently called Snarky Arts, and I really like his content too.
Nice. Cheers, mate. That's nice. You don't think of my printer then? I've only got a really cheap 2K Creality Halo printer, which I picked up for 140 quid about 2 years ago. I don't need a 4K printer.
No, you're going to get great prints on a 2K printer no matter what you do. So a lot of people have looked at these 2K, 4K, 8K, 12K, soon 14K printers, and honestly that doesn't mean anything. More importantly is the pixel size on the actual display, but when it comes to miniatures we haven't really leapt that far between 2K, 4K and 8K, and you can get some solid prints from 2K printers so long as you get your settings right, and the key one for that is anti-aliasing.
For someone as tight as me, that is exactly what I want to hear. Right then, I've got some homework to do. Time for YouTube. I've got to work out what the hell he's talking about, especially anti-aliasing. In terms of the printer, other than the resin and the settings, nothing else has changed. Except for one thing. To help with fume extractions, I found an absolutely massive extractor off eBay. It does help if you have it installed the right way around though. So here's my summary. 3D printing has three variables. The environment, as in how warm it is, how cold it is, the humidity, all that sort of stuff. You want a well-ventilated area, hence the extractor. Between 15 and 24 degrees. It's UK summertime at the moment, so the ambient temperature's hovering around 20. Ross tells me this is a little cool, but there's not much I can do about that at this point. That's going to be the topic of discussion over on my Discord server. The resin. You want a good quality resin that's not too brittle and is easy to clean. Have I mentioned I really like working with this resin? And of course a decent, well-supported model. Got all that? Great. Well then the next thing you need to do is sort the settings on your printer. And the best way to do that is to test it. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Well, you get the idea. And what was the point in all that? Well, I thought this looked good. Apparently, it does not. This is called an exposure test. I've linked the files down below. And these bits are overexposed. How can you tell? The text letters are filled in, boxes are sandwiched together, the rods have expanded, and there's almost no detail in the mesh in the corner. Here's what it's supposed to look like. And this is why I chose this specific exposure test, because it gives you lots of different opportunities to spot where you're under or overexposed. So even someone as inexperienced as me can work it out. Once I had worked it out, it was pretty simple to work out what I needed to do. In the beginning, I just slammed the exposure to 4.4 seconds so it would print in the really cold weather. Once I started testing, however, I started at 2 seconds, then dropped the exposure by 0.5 seconds every time until I started to lose detail. But actually at 1.5 seconds, the resin started to delaminate. This is because the printer pulls apart the layers before they got time to properly cure. But actually the detail looked pretty perfect here. I took it down 0.5 seconds again, just to really see how I could push it, and to show you what underexposed resin looks like. And it looks like that. The next few tests were just playing with lift speeds and bottom exposures, just to see if I could make things better, and just to play while I was messing around with it. But in the end, an exposure time of 1.6 seconds made me very happy. You know what else makes me happy? Now for the real test. Some actual minis. I wanted 100% to know that it wasn't a support issue on the minis. And the best way I know to do that is to head over Cults 3D and grab one of the free models from One Page Rules, which are hands down some of the best models I've ever used. I've linked them down below. Fingers crossed. These printed first time, and coming from One Page Rules, the supports were absolutely mint. But for completeness, I also ran off a set of minis and my old settings, just so I could compare them. Or I should say with the new settings, the model printed in 4.2 hours. The old settings, 8.6. I'd never noticed before, but the old resin was much harder to get off the base plate, which led to accidents, and much harder to get out the supports too. Phew. So, just how wrong was I? First I ran off my minis on my old settings. This is what they look like. And while I was happy with them at the time, looking back now, they're just a bit baggy. Yeah, my settings were not great. Next I ran off a batch on the new improved settings, and I think you can really see a difference. There's a noticeable difference in the amount of visual information on the models. Essentially, they just look crisper. So at this point I showed them to Ross, to see what he thinks, and he came up with a few things I can change. If you don't know what anti-aliasing is, and I only just found out myself, it's basically where the layer lines are slightly rounded and softened before they're rendered. This means you do lose a tiny little bit of crispness, but you lose those layer lines too. So you have to balance this to get the effect you want. Which do you think looks better? Before we get to the wrap up, I just want to remind you that making these videos is a time-consuming process, and if you like the video, please take the time to subscribe. It really means a lot to me. If you want to go one step further, you can check me out on my Patreon, which is a mere £3 a month, and you can support videos like this being made much more regularly. Sorry for the plug, and back to the video. Doing the work I did has really improved the models, which is great, and I'm really happy with that. I also understand the settings and how the materials work much better, so that I can actually problem solve on the fly, which is going to be super useful into the future. I can just feel it. So the bombshell, not bombshell here, is that spending time dialing in your resin printer actually is worth it and does give you better models. Who knew? I still think though that as long as you're happy with what's coming off the printer, you're not going to notice any defects unless you really zoom in on your models. But when it comes to the cost, 3D printing versus Warhammer, well, you're going to have to watch this video to find out what I think about that.